So the theme of this TEDx is the future of happiness. I want to talk to you about creating happier futures. And this is a headline that I didn't necessarily expect to wake up to one morning. It comes from last November in the UK. UK Happiness Index to gauge national mood. And the UK government have decided to create a national indicator of well-being, something that I've been personally campaigning for the last decade. So I was very pleased to wake up to that. And what's happened since then is that the Office of National Statistics, our official statistics agency in the UK, have started a debate around what national well-being is. They've consulted academics, policymakers, members of the public. And then just this week, just earlier this week, the 1st of November 2011, they started to announce the sort of framework that the UK government would measure. And there's David Cameron, our Prime Minister, and to give him some credit, he actually has been talking about this when he was in opposition since 2006, when he talked that the UK should start to measure GWB, general well-being, instead of GDP. He's not operating in isolation. President Sarkozy formed a commission on economic performance and progress. It was led by Joseph Stiglitz. The Stiglitz Commission, as it became known, reported 2 years ago. There probably will be a new Stiglitz Commission starting soon, a second one. The OECD, which is the group of richest nations, have had a program about how nations should measure progress throughout the last 5 or 6 years. The European Union have had a body of work called Beyond GDP, or GDP and Beyond, thinking about how we should measure the quality of life in Europe in a different way. And probably the first political figure to really look at this area is probably quite unknown, but is the King of Bhutan. 1973, he said that Bhutan should be more interested in the gross national happiness of its country rather than the gross national product. So there's a lot going on. And we at the organisation I work for, New Economics Foundation, have been thinking about this for quite some while. So if governments are to think about well-being and happiness, they need to have a model to do it. And we were fortunate enough to do some work for a part of the UK government, a part of the Government Office of Science called Foresight, where they asked us to create a model for policymakers that they could think about well-being. And this is the model that we came up with. At the bottom of the model are two important areas: the external conditions of life and the personal resources. As the Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset said, I am myself and my circumstances. These two things are always going on. And they come together in what we do, how we fare in life. And it's important we understand these two things are going on, because we have to be able to explain why some people thrive in very difficult circumstances and other people sink in very benign circumstances. There's always these two things going on. Obviously, more people thrive in good circumstances, and more people sink in bad circumstances. But the two things are always going on. And then out of how we do, and also the environment that we live in, comes what we feel. We feel and think about our life. And you start to have a model about how these big four domains interact. But as you can see at the moment, all the arrows are pointing upwards. And I called this a dynamic model. And it's very important to realize it is very dynamic. Well-being, happiness is not static. It's very, very fluid. And there's energy flowing all around this system. When we function well, we shape the environment, both our own circumstances and other people. If you've got someone who's great in your community, they make it better for everybody. Similarly, if you work with someone that's a pain, your workplace knows it. And from feelings to functioning, any psychological theory of emotions will talk about the functionality of emotions, that they have evolved for a reason. Happiness, evolution doesn't really care about our happiness. It cares about our surviving and thriving. They've evolved for a reason. Fear is there to help us function and survive. We detect something that's a threat to us, and we take an action, whether it's run away or we collectively together protect ourselves against it. Emotions are very functional. Happiness. What's happiness about from an evolutionary perspective? Well, Barbara Fredrickson, who's probably one of the best positive psychologists, will talk about it, how it broadens our repertoire of responses. That basically, happiness is about opportunities. It's not about threats. It's about allowing us to take advantage of opportunities. Now, policymakers will ask us, what's the sort of balance between these three things that sort of cause happiness? And the way that it's most often articulated is this sort of models, taken from Sonia Livermorsky, that there's a balance between these things. So the red section is showing what's effectively inherited and fixed. The yellow is about the activities that we take. And the green is the circumstances. So we've got about 50% of our happiness, which is fixed and heritable.
Nic, I've told you this so many times, you can't say that. You just can't say that. Obviously, genetics are important for our happiness, probably because it's been so important in our evolutionary history and everyday life, yeah? But this 50% is based on statistical genetics, and often using twin design. So you compare identical twins who are genetically identical, and then non-identical twins who share 50% of their genes. And when you have this kind of information, then you can estimate how much of the variation in happiness, how much of the differences between us are due to genes, and how much is due to the environment. Why all these people are different.
So you're saying here that we basically, by looking at genetic research, we tell the differences between people, not within people.
Yeah. So, and this genetic component, we usually call the heritability estimate. And the heritability will always be a fraction of the total variance. So it's a fraction, yeah?
Yeah.
And if you have genes explaining about 25% or a quarter of this circle, reflecting the whole variation, then we say the heritability is 25%. But it's also a very crude estimate because it reflects all different genetic effects and also some types of gene-environment interplay. And then there's some important misunderstandings to be aware of, and that is that you can never use heritability for single persons, yeah? You can't think that 10% of a person's happiness is due to circumstances, and then 40% due to activities, and then 50% due to genetics. That's wrong.
It's the difference between people.
Yeah. So you have no heritability for a certain trait, like happiness or anything else. Heritability is not constant, so it can change across place and time. It can be quite different in Spain and then in Sudan. And it sort of describes what is in a population at a specific time and not what could be. So even a very high heritability estimate does not imply genetic determinism or that the environment is not important.
Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah. We have height, body height, for example, a commonly used example. Body height is very heritable in most countries. In Norway, it's about 90%, meaning that 90% of the differences between us in body height are due to genetic factors. Still, we have increased in body height. In Norway, over the last century, 10 centimeters. And this is not due to any changes in our DNA. It has to do with better nutrition and better medical care. So sometimes we can look upon a high heritability estimate as reflecting a social good, that we have sort of eliminated a lot of social inequalities. There's no environmental factors left to explain the differences between us, only genes.
So genes explain something. But I'm not very tall and I can't get taller in life. So it's not the best example in some ways. I mean, what about happiness?
You can probably get shorter, yeah?
I probably will too.
And body height can change over generation, but happiness can change at any time. And it also doesn't have a very high heritability estimate. We have been using about 60,000 twins and family members and estimated the heritability to be about 35% of the variance. But what we do see is that there is a stability to happiness. People happy at one time point, they will also often be happy at another time point, and they will be happy at work, and then they will also be happy, at the gym or at a party. And this stability is mainly due to genes. So we do seem to have some kind of a genetic propensity to see the glass as half full or half empty.
Yeah.
But, importantly, there is as much change in life as there is stability. And the environment is the source of that change. So where you are, who you're with, and what you do is tremendously important for your happiness.
So these guys, obviously, their happiness is about dancing about naked outside in nature.
Yeah.
But, this is actually, what we do is actually something that governments are interested in, not so much necessarily nudity, but, they often give us messages that we should be eating more fruits and vegetables. Basically, this is a public health message around our diet. And one of the things I said to the Foresight group was actually, we needed to think in the same way about happiness and well-being. What would be the equivalent of 5 fruits and vegetables a day, but for our happiness and well-being? So if we go back to this model that I showed earlier, this is an intervention right in the middle. We're basically trying to shape people's behavior. Advertising does this all sorts of ways, and public policy often tries to do that too. And these were the 5 things that we came up with. The first one is that we should connect. We've heard a lot about connections today, but our social relationships are undeniably the most important part of our happiness and well-being. And to remember that, and to remember our relationships are the cornerstones of our life, is very, very important. The next one is your favorite. Be active. And probably the one I struggle with most. Sometimes these things are effortful, but being active is the quickest way out of a fast mood. Out of a bad mood. It's something that makes us feel very good. The next one is about take notice. Noticing what's going on around us, the changing seasons, even when it rains. A bit about mindfulness, but people like to go fishing or relaxing, quieten their mind. Taking notice is really good for our well-being. The next one is keep learning. And the keep is very important. It's through the whole life course. Learning is not just about schools and when we're young. It's actually being, curious, isn't it, really, throughout the whole of our lives. And then the final one is give. Evolution is amazing in this way. We actually feel good when we're generous to other people because the group survival is really, really important. And so giving is very good for our happiness and well-being.
Yeah, I'm sure these interventions are based on a very, very solid evidence base, and we do see that a lot of happiness interventions will work, especially in the laboratory. People assigned to experimental conditions and receiving a happiness intervention, they will leave the experiment happier than the control group. But in real life, people are active agents, selecting and choosing the activities they take part in, partly due to genetic factors. The way genes work will often be to drive you towards certain activities or circumstances, so the environment we are exposed to is not a random environment. You are so sociable, you love to interact, you love to talk to people, and maybe you even generate more happiness in these situations than people less sociable. But you are less likely to be very active, and meet my sister, for instance, on top of this mountain.
Yeah.
And maybe even less likely to follow Erling to the South Pole.
Yeah, and into the sewer, I think, as well.
But I do think your interventions are very good, But what is annoying me a lot and making me a bit provoked, is the focus on, the genetic part, the big genetic part, and the activities, just placing the responsibility and causes of your happiness within you all the time. Because there is another thing here, which is the circumstances, and when you put it like this, it appears to be unimportant. And clearly our circumstances matter. I mean,
it's very, very true. Our circumstances matter. And most of those measures are done in Western countries where there's a certain standard of living amongst all people. And we do see very big variations in happiness measures. If you go to sub-Saharan Africa, as you would do to a country like Spain or the UK or the USA. And this really brings us to the other big intervention point. In fact, this is where most of government intervenes, which is thinking about how to influence the external conditions of life. That actually government should not be about trying to directly make us happy. That would be a bit weird. Okay? But government should be about creating the conditions out of which well-being can emerge, happiness can emerge. And if we think about the state of our nations at the moment, you know, unemployment, 20% in Spain, over 10% in the UK. That's wasted lives. You know, these guys are sitting on a park bench all day, nothing to do. Huge loss of potentiality. We've had riots in London this summer, you know, a sense of great frustration going on. And, you know, here in Spain.
Indignados?
In the Indignados, yeah. And Occupy Wall Street, Occupy the stock exchange, all going on really, complaining about the fact that there's been a lot of innovation and growth in the economic terms in the banking system over the last 10 years. But that has not been generating much well-being, as it has undermined the whole economy as we've gone forward. So governments really need to think about what they can do to improve people's happiness and well-being. And broadly speaking, governments intervene in 3 areas of our life: the economy, the delivery of public services, and the shaping of local spaces. There are other things they do too, but broadly speaking, those are the 3 big things. And so come up with 7 strategies, 7 happiness strategies really, that they could think about. And these are not prescriptions, they're sort of ideas around what they could do, but they're sort of, you'll get the feel of them. So the first one is to create good work.
Yeah, very important. Work makes you connect, you can be active, keep learning, and also give you a kind of financial security. And we do see that, you know, without good work, well,
people's mental health suffers, and that they
obviously, and we do also see diminished life satisfaction.
Yeah, and the second one is that I want to put forward is that we need to reform the banking system. You know, this is a happiness intervention. The financial industry is unlike any other industry that we have. It creates and it allocates credit. Financial exclusion, people who cannot raise money, they become, you know, vulnerable to predatory lenders, high interest rates, compound interest. Indebtedness is terrible for our well-being. People who get over-indebted, you know, their whole mental health starts to collapse.
Yeah, we see the highest relative risk or odds ratio for developing mental health problems in Norway today is severe financial problems.
So we really now need to take the opportunity of this financial crisis to put people before profit and to put social and environmental value at the heart of our financial situation and take it out of just private profit. So that's my most important thing I think governments can do for happiness, which sounds a bit ironic. But there are other things, you know, our schooling systems, you know, are often not well-being generating. You know, they should be...
Stimulate curiosity.
Yeah, they should be stimulating curiosity. It should be about learning in the broadest sense, and learning also life skills. Promoting complete health, not just thinking about biological and physical and the reduction of that, but actually thinking about mental and spiritual health too.
Prevention and promotion.
And prevention and promotion, health promotion in the communities and everywhere. And then with local spaces, engaging with citizens, often hard for government. Often government hides behind walls, hides behind sort of bureaucracy with it. But they've got to engage much more with citizens, and that means listening to them in a very profound way. And building good foundations. The built environment creates better or worse lives. I mean, depending on the quality of the environment that we live in, the physical environment that we live in, you know, how can we design the 5 ways into our building schemes and our planning permission for what gets planning permission? Building good foundations is really good. And then the final one, and I would say this because I'm a statistician, is that we, you know, we need to measure what matters. Because what is measured matters. Absolutely. And we need to create good measures of national well-being. We need to create better data for academics to study. You know, there's lots of stuff to do that. And I think if we start to do these 7 strategies and the 5 ways ourselves, then, you know, we will start to build a happier future. And perhaps one day we'll wake up to a headline that looks like this. Thank you very much.